And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Meredith Lego, who has been on a spiritual awakening journey, which has resulted in channeling other consciousnesses, tuning into multiple dimensions, and having out-of-body experiences. She thinks she saw a being that monitors the simulation, which we're going to talk about and more. Meredith, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I mean, I really appreciate everything that you do and help to raise awareness of consciousness and open minds. So thank you.
Meredith, if you don't mind, let's start at the beginning of your awakening and go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that my awakening started somewhere around 2014. And what started the journey is I was, a normal mom, normal wife, normal person living in the everyday world with a job, and started to get a little disillusioned or frustrated by what was going on in the world around me. And as I was getting a little bit depressed around that, I received some really good coaching from somebody who had just gone through their spiritual awakening of saying, you may not be able to change everything in the world around you all the time. Like you can't control everything, but the one thing that you can control is yourself. So they coached on the concept of going within and starting to work on your own triggers and traumas. So essentially that's what I started to do. And through that process, I really felt a drive to what I later learned was increase my frequency and feel lighter, basically, around everything that I was doing every day. Just feel happier, feel lighter, and resonate back to the way that I always felt growing up as a child. I was trying to get back to that point. And as I was doing that, I was beginning to do more research and understand how you can do that. So part of it was just watching what you're eating and stuff like that, and meditating. So I started going down that path to the point where one day I just made a decision on one day I was going to stop caffeine, stop alcohol, although I didn't drink very much, go vegetarian, and just start meditating. And that's kind of what I did. And when I started to do that, I started to experience changes in terms of multidimensional perception. So extrasensory perceptions actually started to turn on during that experience. So I first started experiencing what would be called clairsentience. And I literally could feel when other energy, other consciousness was in the room. And then I had a major vision that was the first vision I ever had during meditating. And it actually relates to the concept of what we're going to talk about a little later on about the simulation. But essentially, I found myself with a very strong clairvoyant vision of being on the very edge of an event horizon. So an event horizon is the point circulating a black hole, which is something that is a phenomenon in space, or scientists believe it's in space. And that's the point at which light can no longer escape moving into the black hole. So I was on the edge of a black hole, and around the entire construct of the black hole, if you will, were golden grid lines, which were basically large energy lines that were sort of emanating all around the space. So that was the first vision I had. And then immediately I was swept into a ground level in what looked like the Amazon forest. And I realized that I was a snake. I was actually a snake in the body of a snake, and I was shedding the skin. Now, needless to say, when you're new and your entire life before that has been, being, a normal person and a business executive and stuff like that, that freaked me out a little bit because snakes are oftentimes associated with, bad stuff. But essentially, I learned later that it actually was a symbolism of transformation. So you're shedding into a new version of yourself. And that snake was being sort of monitored by what I would call, it looked like a Mayan guide. So like a 4-foot Mayan, if you will, shaman, who was delivering the message to push, push, push. So that was a very first vision that I had. And then I would say a couple days later, I went to go see a Reiki healer. And as he was working on, I think, my crown chakra, he said, I'm getting a message that I'm being told to deliver to you. And it's like push, push, or pursue, pursue, pursue. And that piqued my interest, obviously, because he was sensing and picking up on the exact same message and experience that I had. What was unique about this is that I'd grown up in a very scientific household. You know, I had a father who had worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratory as a rocket scientist. My mother was strong into finance and accounting, and I was very analytic. So these types of experiences were not in my field of awareness growing up. I was highly analytic, very atheist growing up. So that continued me wanting to go down the journey even more. So as I continued to increase the meditations, I started to essentially experience what I would call out-of-body experiences. Started to spontaneously remember some what we would call parallel lives or past lives. So to this date, I've probably witnessed between 50 to 60 past or parallel lives, and some of them have not been in a human body. And one of the unique things of going out of body, which is, you know, part of that experience as well, is that I've gone out of body, and you've had other guests on your show who have talked about that, where you raise your consciousness out of your body. It's a little different than astral projecting, but you can look down, you see your physical body, and then you can go places based upon your intention. There was a couple times where I actually went out of the body and was sort of swept up past a very strong mist. And I think I recall one other guest that I heard about on, maybe it was on your show or some other show, that talks about passing through a mist and then went through what was a wormhole. You know, it was definitely traveling through like a tunnel, not of light, but it was a curvy tunnel. And at the other end, on one occasion, so this happened twice, on one occasion, there was a council of beings. I unfortunately didn't have the ability to see them clairvoyantly, but I could hear them. So by this point, clairaudient capabilities had started to turn on. And they basically had a message that Earth, humans, were starting to enter into a period of great flux. So this was probably back in 2016 or so. And that we, as humans, were going to have to start to learn to be very discerning. That there was essentially forces that were playing out between dark and light energy that were going to be, you know, working on manipulating humanity during this time. And that was an interesting message, because I really didn't believe in any of that stuff. But, you know, I took that back, just kind of sat on it, stewed on it, and continued to pursue my journey. At the same time, I've also had experiences of going through this type of a wormhole and sort of going into other timelines in the past or the future. Some other experiences that I had were as I was learning about frequency and starting to get more clairaudient messages. And it was starting to confirm to me that this was, you know, not in my head, this was actually happening. I had the experience of hearing individuals who had just deceased. So kind of like what a medium would. So I was getting individuals who were communicating to me, and they were telling me their names and saying they had recently passed. And then fortunately, because of our modern technology, I had the ability to look them up and say, oh my gosh, here's the obituary, you know? So I don't know this person. They're from, you know, some other state, you know, I've never heard of them. And here I'm reading the obituary and they died 6 months ago or something like that.
That's
so
amazing.
It blew me away. It
Now,
blew me away.
when you look these people up, had they recently died?
Well, I would say they had, like, one had died 2 weeks prior, another had died maybe 6 months prior. And it only happened like 2 or 3 times. So it didn't happen a lot. It was just enough of an experience, probably, for me to then move on to realizing and having more an expanded understanding that all this is possible. Again, because I was coming from a very scientific background where this was all woo-woo, right? So I'd say also I started to tune in to other frequencies, such as radio stations. I didn't even think that that was feasible or possible, but this was happening usually in deep, deep meditation, sort of on the verge of being awake and asleep. But I'd have the sensation knowing that I was awake because I'd be hearing maybe my husband making coffee out in the other room or the TV playing, but I'd also be, having these experiences. So it could be like bilocation of consciousness or, multi-sensory perceptions. That's kind of what's going on. But, I tune into radio stations. One time I picked up a Hispanic station. Another time I picked up a station that was actually in a past timeline. So it was a former president from the 1930s, and it was playing at that particular time. So what it taught me was that there really was no time when you started to connect into the unified field of energy, and that you could really tune into any timeline at any point, any space-time vector that there was. So finally, this kind of culminated with starting to have more experiences of finding myself in classrooms when I was going out of body and being counseled more by like a counselor or set of teachers. And then it culminated to a point of hearing a message that literally I heard the terms, "This is the clarion call. You are ready. You are ready to go forward." And I assumed, sometimes I'm getting snippets of information, that it was time to start whatever I was supposed to start when I was coming here, to Earth. So at that time, I was then introduced to what later I came to learn was an Ascended Master. I didn't know it was at the time, but an Ascended Master named Hilarion, who basically wanted to start working with me on a project. And that project was to start to bring forward some information around the mechanics of how our reality operates, so that could be shared with the world. And, it helped me kind of understand the framework, but then I had the luxury of actually being able to see it play out in physical reality by witnessing, something that you mentioned during the introduction of my bio, of actually seeing an operator or somebody who's like operating a simulation. So, but he explained the mechanics of actually how the construct or the reality that we live in actually works.
What is the method that you use to get out of body?
The method that I was taught, that I have started to use, is basically programming your consciousness at the point of falling asleep. So my experiences of going out of body have been early in the morning, maybe around 5 a.m. in the morning, maybe 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning, because at that time my body is rested, so I'm not just falling asleep, but I'm still in that state. The brain is still in the brainwave of consciousness in order to experience multidimensionality that way. So what I was taught by some family members who have trained in this particular practice is that you sort of program your consciousness just on the verge of falling asleep, and then you can experience. Now I know you've had other guests on your show. I think it's Darius, right, if I recall, and other guests that I've, who have very intentional training protocols on how to do it. But that's the process that I have used. So even if I tried to do that with that particular method, sometimes I fall asleep and it's not successful. Other times I make it. But what I also began to realize that it was also happening spontaneously. So I would not necessarily have the intention of going out of body, but it would just start to happen. And usually at that time in the morning, I might be lying on my stomach, sleeping that way. And then all of a sudden I'd sense my legs starting to rise up. And it's almost like, it's kind of funny. So you're laying down, you can sense your light body is rising up. And I was kind of connected at the crown, at the crown chakra. And then that eventually would release. but, you know, I'd be hanging there upside down for a period of time. It was pretty odd feeling. So that's how it happens.
You grew up in a scientific household, and I believe you were also atheist.
Yeah.
So when all this woo-woo stuff happened to you, how did you deal with it?
Well, fortunately, at the time, I think other individuals who had gone through this experience were beginning to come out or share it within platforms such as this. And so I had the luxury of realizing that I wasn't alone in the journey. I think probably what was most challenging was figuring out, how do I stay authentic and true to myself and true to the experiences that I'm having, and be able to share them with others in my immediate family or in my work environment. Because, you know, once you have these experiences, you can't deny that they're happening, you know. So I'm looking at it logically, going, okay, you know, this happened, it was verified by another third party that he was receiving the same message, or this happened and I was able to, you know, validate it through technology obituaries that this person did in fact pass away. So at least I had sort of experience proof. And I guess that's kind of more, you know, the scientific methodology. So you're able to back it up. So when I had that, then I had to be authentic to myself and say, you know, this is going to be a part of my life. It's sort of, once you start having these experiences, it changes everything in your life. You can't unremember that. You can't unexperience that. And so at that point, you know, I felt I've got to, it's got to be part of who I am on a day-to-day basis. I want to be able to speak freely with this around these topics with my family, with colleagues at work, and I'm kind of like in a professional work environment where you don't know how that's going to be taken. You know, I know I'm going to want to start sharing this with the world, because with the concepts that I was learning from Ascended Master Hilarion, I was certainly writing it down during the channeling, but I was like, this is too important information for me to keep to myself. I need to share it. And in the course of sharing it, you know, my employers could figure out that I'm sharing it. So I need to be true to them and, you know, make sure that they understand what I'm doing, because I was at that time sort of in a client facing role and it could get out to clients. So that was more challenging, is figuring out how to come out and do it, but be true to myself along the journey.
What can you share with us about the mechanics of this realm we live in?
Yeah, absolutely. So the project that I started with Ascended Master Hilarion, so he kind of first introduced himself to me in another dimension, saying, okay, I'm going to start working with you. He actually laid out almost like a table of contents of the items that he wanted to cover. So it included the quantum field, how consciousness gets mirrored. He talked about polarity. He actually talked about the stages of ascension as we increase our consciousness and what's going on and how it is that we do that. So very specific content that he wanted to go through. But it all comes back down to the construct that we live in. So he basically explained that we live, or we exist, if you will, in a holographic construct that contains everything that, you know, is, was, ever will be, in a field of energy, or quantum field of energy. And it's made up of quantum particles, which he actually termed them as divas. So these quantum particles actually have consciousness to them. So they're energy, and all energy is conscious. So they are conscious and of themselves. And so an observer or an experiencer within the construct, if you will, has the ability to sort of work with these with these quantum particles and the consciousness of the quantum particles through thought and intention. So essentially, what, as the observer or the experience thinks, all is manifest in the moment through the actual quantum particles, and it can be magnified through emotional intensity, which is magnetic in nature. I'm trying to think what else he brought up. So essentially, when an experience has a thought, that thought and any sort of emotional frequency that goes along with that thought is going to create an electromagnetic frequency around the source of the thought. So let's say it's a person. A person is going to have a thought. They're going to emanate an electromagnetic frequency around them. And then essentially this frequency has the ability to, it creates a sound, if you will. So frequency has a certain sound tone to it. And that sound tone starts to actually manipulate patterns inside of the quantum particles. And at the time, I was also being shown and coached on the concept of cymatics. And cymatics is the study of how, I'm trying to think of the technical name for it, but essentially you can observe how sound frequency actually manipulates patterns, and it's best displayed of seeing how like sand or water might actually kind of reconstruct into different patterns based upon sound frequencies. Basically, I encourage your viewers to look it up on the internet, cymatics. So I was learning about that, and he was basically bringing this concept up as well. Yeah, so basically, as we experience, as we have thoughts, we essentially are sort of manipulating the consciousness of these quantum particles and creating patterns of reality inside of matter. That's basically it. And one of the things that he said is that every single being is essentially surrounded by an electromagnetic field, like every consciousness unit is. So it could be a person, it could be an animal or a plant, it could be a rock, it could be a galaxy, like any sort of consciousness at all level and all ranges is surrounded by an electromagnetic field. And he basically described that at one end of the consciousness unit or the being in physical reality, you're going to have basically a black hole and a white hole. So let's say the top is a black hole, and this is how it kind of connects to the first vision that I had. The black hole is basically magnetic in charge, okay, and it essentially pulls in energy, or it pulls in any sort of information from the field that we exist in within the construct. The white hole, which is going to be at the top, is electric, and that is the point through which energy is pushed out. So essentially, a being living in the construct with the ability to sort of manipulate the matter has the ability to sort of bring in information from the field magnetically through this black hole, and then essentially push it out energetically into action through words, through taking action, any kind of physical intention, if you will. And in the middle of those 2 points is what he termed the 0 point, but that was the point in which there's no charge. So it's an equal balancing between electrical and magnetic fields, and it's the point of potential energy as opposed to kinetic energy in motion. But where all this comes in is that we basically in the field, so we're in a simulation or holographic simulation. He basically said you're in an environment where your very thought and your very existence, you have the ability to sort of manipulate your world. Again, because you can manipulate the quantum particles, so you can manipulate the environment that you live in through your intentions and through your emotions, and that helps you experience your reality. And you're in a bit of like a school, if you will, learning how to essentially master your environment by mastering your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body, and your energy body. So he kind of got into the fact that we've got multiple bodies, we're learning to master them, and we're going on a journey of being initiated through various stages of ascension in somewhat of a safe, construct to help us understand how to manipulate energy through all this. And so the concept of almost a torus field of energy that's operating around us is that we will bring in certain information from the unified field that can be coming in from our higher self or our soul, for example. And then we have the ability to action it. We obviously always have free will choice. And within free will choice, you know, when you're kind of living in a world of different sort of energies that are playing around you, there's like good and bad and hot and cold. You always have the ability of choosing what energies you want to experience and what energies you want to bring into the world. But let's say you have an experience and you, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. You have the experience, let's just take a child. They want to touch a hot stove and the parent knows better, like don't touch the hot stove, but the child is on a journey to touch the hot stove anyway. You know, so they bring in the idea, I would like to touch the hot stove. They touch the hot stove, they have an experience, you know, that gets actioned out. And then that energy circulates around as the ability to sort of understand the experience that you had, process it, learn from that experience, and then be able to reintegrate it back into your beingness. And so as souls, as individuals, we have the ability to truly integrate our learnings by going through that continuous cycle of having a thought, actioning that thought, understanding the implications of that thought or that action, and then sort of reintegrating it back into your beingness for the next stage of learning. So that's what he talked about. But what was interesting about this simulation is that, you know, oftentimes many guests on your channel or on other channels like this will talk about different dimensions, right? So right now we are experiencing a physical dimension. And when you go, let's say some of your near-death experiencers, because you have a lot of those, might be going, you know, to another dimension at that point of near death. And then there's the astral plane and whatnot. But what I learned is that all of these dimensions are actually contained within the simulation also. It's not like when you die, you're past the simulation, you're still in it. You're just in a different level, if you will, in the simulation. And what's interesting is that I was shown that we, the construct that we kind of live in is, it's almost like a petal on a flower. So imagine you have a flower, you know, with multiple petals on it, or a butterfly. That's another good imagery. Within one petal or within one wing of the butterfly, you're going to have multiple dimensions through which consciousness is evolving. And that consciousness can evolve. So you basically move up to dimensions based upon the level of your frequency and your consciousness, but that also dictates the density of your physical matter, okay? So the two are connected. So the higher your frequency, the higher your consciousness, the less dense the matter. So even in the same construct, you could have beings around you that, let's say you can't see with your physical eyes, because they're high frequency, they're less dense. So it'd be similar to a fan moving really, really fast. It's there, but you just can't see it because it's vibrating so fast. So as you're kind of moving up the density frequency, you're still in the same petal, if you will, of the flower. But there is the ability to go to another petal of the flower. It's just another construct that is operating under different physical laws, if you will. So, you know, we are operating under laws of, let's say, free will or polarity, of, you know, opposites of energy, or maybe even gravity. I'm not sure if that's one of the laws, cause and effect. Like these are laws. In another petal, there would be another construct with a different set of experiences and rules for the consciousness to go through.
Did Hilarion ever use the word simulation or matrix or anything like that when describing this construct?
You know, He used the word construct. I believe that when I was working with him, I'd kind of set up a series of questions. I believe I asked him, do we live in a matrix? Because I wanted to confirm that. And he said, well, you basically live in an environment that is like a safe learning lab, if you will, for you to experience and understand how to manipulate matter in your environment through your thoughts. So he didn't use the word matrix, but he did use the word construct.
Did he say who created the construct?
Nope, he did not. I have not asked that, interestingly enough.
What did the being look like that you saw that was monitoring the construct?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me set up the scenario for this one. But to answer your question really fast, the being was human. It looked human, like, us on Earth. But in this particular case, I had gotten up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, so I was wide awake, came back, was wide awake. And then I looked over to the side of my bed and I saw this being who was sitting at, it was, humanoid, who was sitting at a workstation. It was a holographic workstation. So it was a desk. And what she was looking at was holographically displayed on her desk. She was, for anybody who's watched the Star Wars genre movies, the Jedi who kind of come back after they've died to visit, I don't know, Luke or something, they're sort of glowing in blue, slightly blue outline. That's what she had emanating over her, around her body, was a very, there was a very, very bright blue light body, if you will, configuration. And so she was sitting there and she was essentially observing many individuals in her monitoring station, if you will, of individuals. And I didn't know what she was observing, but I got the sense that it was almost like a nurse in a hospital who would be observing multiple patients in a room. So she was sitting there and she was observing multiple patients, or multiple people, I guess, multiple consciousness that was, kind of existing in a simulation. And I was fascinated. I almost wanted to poke my husband, who was laying there in the bed with me, to say, can you see this? Because it was pretty interesting. So I was watching her and observing, and I did not want to make a movement because I just wanted to observe what she was doing. But as soon as I thought that, she immediately realized that I was watching her and was able to sort of see behind the veil. She was immediately all of a sudden over my face. And so her face was almost like directly over my face. She was looking down. She had a very positive energy coming off of her. I didn't, sense anything negative. And next thing I know, her hand went over my head. So imagine I'm lying down in a bed, her hand went over my head and she started essentially hitting some buttons. And then I was out cold. So then I was put to sleep. So that was the experience. And, that got me thinking a lot more about the nature of reality. So I had already had these conversations with Hilarion about the nature of the world that we are in. And I didn't even enter it asking, hey, do we live in a simulation? He was just telling me, this is the construct that you live in. And then a few years later, I had this experience of actually seeing it. Now, I've been on a journey trying to figure out, who did I see? What was that all about? I was wide awake when I saw this. This wasn't something where it was a lucid dream or something. I was wide awake. And I've had several readers basically indicate, just as I felt, which is you were seeing a guide and you had the ability to see beyond the veil, but it wasn't supposed to happen. It was kind of like an accident.
Do you think that your body is somewhere in a pod like the Matrix and you're just projecting your consciousness into this realm?
Well, I don't have the answer to that question. That is one possibility, right? So I think one of your guests, Tim, what's his last name?
Tim Tactics.
Tim Tactics, yeah. I don't think it was on your show, but I think on Gaia, he referenced the fact that some beings entered into Earth as opposed to, through a traditional incarnation process. They've come in and they're connected consciousness through a pod, kind of like what you're describing. So it could be that, everybody here on Earth has a different way of sort of entering into the experience.
You saw a being that was some sort of monitor to the simulation. Did you get any or hear any communication that was going on?
Yeah, I did. It wasn't at that particular time when I saw that being, but in another experience, I was having, a sequence of dreams, and I heard in the background a couple of operators describe what was going on. So let me set the scene for this. I was having, sometimes I've heard some others in various YouTube channels or whatnot talk about this experience, but I have the experience several times of essentially having a dream and then working very hard to wake up from that dream, only to figure out that you're in another dream. And you work really hard to wake up from that, only to figure out that you're in another dream. Okay. So it becomes a challenge to figure out how to wake up, because you know that you're not in the awakened state yet. And this is very similar to a movie that came out, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, called Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio. But essentially that's what's playing out. They're actually going into dreams of other people and then going deeper and deeper into the subconscious of that individual. So when I raised up out of one level, I actually had an interaction with a couple of different individuals who basically were describing to me how the construct was being managed behind the scenes. So they actually showed me some of the technology that they use in order to manage the construct. But what I also heard in the background is that as I realized, wait, we have to wake up. And then there's another effort to try and wake up again. And then there's another effort to wake up again. And it's a struggle every time you want to wake up. And, I realized in that moment, it was an analogy to what we're going through right now on the planet Earth. So, we know that we're starting to go through an awakening as a species and sort of elevate our frequency to that next level. But that's also getting us to the next level in the construct, or the next dimensional level. But as I was realizing the connection between the dream and what's going on in our physical reality of humans getting to that next dimensional level, is that as I was realizing this in my mind, I heard the two operators basically say, "She's figured it out." So in other words, that is part of the lesson as well, of not just understanding how to manage and manipulate energy and your environment through your physical, your emotional, your mental, and your energetic bodies, but also essentially how to sort of rise up to the dimensional spectrums. Now, eventually I have to imagine we get off of the one pedal, and then we have the ability to maneuver into another pedal if we want to within another construct. So essentially we're on a journey of kind of going through the levels of a game, if you will. That's the only analogy I can create.
Did Hilarion reveal to you if you want to exit the simulation, you can?
Well, certainly you can exit the simulation at any time through a death process, right? So that doesn't take an Ascended Master to tell us that. But I have learned a couple things about, we do have choices on when we want to exit the simulation. So prior to coming in through a typical incarnation, you will actually set up multiple exit points. I did have the experience of actually hearing the guide ask me while I was meditating, "Would you like to take your exit point?" Now that threw me for a loop, because I knew what that was. And, I'm not that old, but I wasn't expecting that question to come up. And it came up twice in 2 weeks. So clearly I was around a point when I had set up for an exit point. So I guess that if you're tuned in, you can actually talk to your guide about taking exit points. But I did learn from not necessarily Hilarion, but another group that I channel, which is a collective consciousness, on actually how to stop incarnating into Earth within the simulation. Let me put it to you that way. So that was pretty interesting.
So we're not forced to return to this realm over and over again, right?
You know, the jury's still out on that one. I think, you know, what Hilarion would suggest is that we're not forced. It's a free will choice as a soul or as a being to come in. But I would say this other council that I heard from sort of has implied that there's definitely some sort of a battle that's going on in which some souls are sort of being trapped into a situation. I will tell you, though, that when I learned about exiting the incarnation process from Earth, is that we have the ability to sort of control our destiny around that. So the way that I got into understanding this is I was asking a question about when the soul actually comes in to the body, you know, during the birthing process, or, you know, as the being is starting to develop in the mother's womb. That's what I wanted to know. And what I learned during that process is that when the sperm and the egg essentially come together, an initial seed cell is created that eventually forms into a zygote and to an embryo and whatnot. But that seed cell develops an energetic double cell. So this is what they channel to me. And this energetic double cell, like replicate cell, has 15 different gateways or portals in it that essentially connect into the unified field and also connect into the consciousness of the earth. And through those portals, we sort of ingest codes or information around Earth and what it means to have an experience as consciousness on the Earth. So that's where then you come in, you know, when you look up and you see the blue sky, it's blue sky. So everybody has a common sense of understanding of what it means to experience life on Earth in a physical body. But what also happens is that you're also starting to bring in that energetic double of that seed cell is also starting to bring in and can bring in blockages of energy that might have been created from your parents and from the ancestral line. So essentially, if your parents or your ancestors had some very significant emotional traumas in their lives, they would have essentially created blockages within their own energy bodies that could have actually altered the sequence of their DNA. And then that gets passed down to you and can essentially create blockages in that energetic cell that you have connected to your seed cell. And that could explain why individuals, let's say, might have a tendency to become an alcoholic if their parents were an alcoholic or something like that, or they might have a tendency to have certain fears, you know, around certain events in their life. And what I learned is that the actual way to stop incarnating is to actually clear out the blockages in those portals. And, you know, when I heard this, I'm like, great, good for us to know. How do we do this? You know, like, it's not like I can just, you know, scrub that seed cell out. Like, how do you do it? And so they essentially said, well, the way that you do it is by understanding and doing the inner work to really understand what triggers you, what your traumas are. So some of it could be from the current life that you're living in, and you're sort of building up like triggers or traumas based upon your interactions with others in the world around you. Or it could come from past lives, or it could be, but anything that sort of triggers you, tune into that and work on healing that. And a lot of what comes with that is also learning to forgive yourself and forgive others. And when you start to do that, you're essentially starting to release and clear out some of that energetic goop, if you will, that could be living in that one cell, as well as in the other, energetic, the energetic body that also is one of your four lower bodies, in addition to the physical, the emotional, and the mental. And then you've got this energetic body. So by doing that, you essentially are then releasing any sort of cause and effect energies that get built up over time, and that releases your ability to have to be pulled back down into an incarnation after you leave.
Did you ever learn how to manipulate this construct that we live in to your own benefit?
That's a good question. So I'm still on that journey every single day. So I think certainly I've had experiences where, yes, I have been able to flow very well with it. So I think the most important thing that I've learned is that you're essentially flowing with your intuition. You're flowing with what brings you the most happiness in the next now moment. And when you can get into that flow and you don't second guess what that intention is that's coming to you intuitively, that's when I've had the experience of best manipulating the matrix, if you will. I think that one thing that we learned is that, clearly we're never a victim to anything that happens to us. So everything that we experience is based upon our own thought and our own intention. So we are absolutely never a victim to anything that we experience. And, as I was learning this, I was like, well, that's really hard to, swallow when you're going
Yeah.
through an earthquake or something,
Well, I'm sure there's going to be
Yeah,
comments in the
I'm sure there will be.
about
Yeah,
what
yeah.
about all these, people that go through earthquakes or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I live in a hurricane zone, so I go through a lot of that too. But some of that is experiences. Certainly some things you might have actually contracted to experience prior to incarnating in the life. So that could be playing out, and due to a cause and effect pattern that might have played out in a prior life, or maybe you did it in order to help facilitate the learning and growth of another person in your life. Some of it could be because of the cause and effect of energies that you essentially created in your own life through your own thoughts and intentions. And some of it could be you're subconsciously putting off energy that you don't even know that you are. So as an example, something that I'm working on in this particular life is overcoming the feeling of unworthiness. And I grew up in an environment that was very supportive and you can do anything, but there's still this deep lingering something going on inside of my subconscious. And so I attract those lessons into my reality that are essentially challenging me on that particular deep rooted, very, very unconscious feeling that could be playing out.
It seems like most people suffer while being here. Not 24 hours a day generally, but we go through episodes of suffering.
Yeah.
Did he mention anything about that?
I would say that there were different pockets in which he got into this. And I think the coaching was, with every experience that you have two choices, right? You could choose to be a victim to that experience, or you could pause in those moments and really reflect on why you're going through that experience, and essentially how it is that you start to reframe your experience of that moment. So essentially, because I, like everybody else, have these moments that is not fun. So in those moments, I really stop and pause and reflect upon, okay, so why might I be experiencing this? What can I be learning from this? How do I reframe my situation? And sometimes, if it's especially a negative experience, it might be interacting with others in the moment, and let's say it becomes emotional or something like that, I really work on trying to sort of not pull my consciousness out, but sort of take a third person observer view of what's playing out in the situation, and sort of say, okay, I'm going to try and not get emotional about what's going on right now, because I know that can super hypercharge magnetically what's playing out in the situation, or what's going to be coming next down, as I kind of circle that energy back around through a cause and effect pattern, and it could magnify the experience coming back. So I'm going to, take a third person observer view and try and understand what they're learning, what I'm learning, which is kind of hard to do because you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody, or, you're going through an event that's not very fun, and you're experiencing that, playing it up while also trying to assess and analyze what's going on too. But that was the coaching that he offered on that.
Now, you wrote a book about your channelings with Hilarion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's called The Science of Ascension, Channel Teachings from Ascended Master Hilarion. But in this particular book, as I mentioned, he first goes into a lot of detail, and I didn't do it justice as much as probably what's written in this book, but essentially as to what the quantum field is, why we experience suffering in terms of different extremes of energy. So you call it suffering. The opposite would probably be bliss and joy. But it's through our experience of living in a world that has those extreme opposites, in which we can learn and grow. That's how we grow the soul, basically, is through those experiences. And it's not fun when we're, not experiencing the great stuff. It's fun when we're, experiencing the great stuff. But that's how we learn, and how we grow as a consciousness being, as a consciousness unit. And then that could be shared back into the unified field of energy, if you will. So he gets into a lot of that. He gets into the concept of mirroring, and how, essentially in the construct, we have the ability of seeing our own behaviors play and reflect back to us through others. And how that was a little neat trick that was kind of built into the construct. And then he gets into basically what are our 6 stages of ascension that essentially we go through. They're almost initiation points. The first one gets into really mastering the physical body. The second is the emotional body, then the mental body. Then essentially starting to integrate those 3 bodies together. And then it kind of moves up the ladder, if you will. So he gets into a lot of detail around that. And then a little bit about the future human.
That's interesting. What has he said about the future?
So he essentially says that in the future, humans are going to become, obviously, and this is nothing new from other things that you've heard, but essentially start to move off of the spectrum of extreme polarities more into neutrality. So as you move up the dimensional ladder, the polar opposite energies always exist. It's just our experience in them aren't extreme, because we're coming more into neutrality and our understanding of how the energies work to help with evolution. So he said that's essentially what starts to happen. He did talk about basically what's going to happen to the physical body relative to its evolution, with light and light frequencies starting to change the DNA codes of the body. So what's driving this is actually a lot of what's going on with the sun right now in the construct. So essentially the sun, actually photons in of themselves are carriers of frequency and frequency codes. And so essentially within every single atom within our body, we have little black holes and white holes that are going on, circulating that light and that code. So we essentially absorb those codes in that are carried in through photons, and that's starting to evolve the structure of our DNA. So I'm not sure if I talk about that in the book. That might have come in after I published that book. So it's available on a YouTube channel that I host as well. He did talk about the future of the financial system, because I asked him about that. And he basically said that you're going to be moving more into a quantum financial system, in which essentially, basically today we live in a world of money. And, I had never thought about it this way, but money is nothing more than a way to exchange the debits and credits. It measures the debits and credits of energy. So that's all you're doing, is exchanging energy. And he said, the way that you exchange energy can actually happen in any form. Today, you're using a monetary process, but it can become more of a quantum process. And in fact, in the future, the financial system would be based more upon your intentions and the energy that flows around your intentions. I have no idea what that looks like, but that's what he gets into a little bit.
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's actually called Ascension Science. I did later find out there's several other channels that are also titled this one. So I believe it's Ascension Science, I want to say 9776, but maybe you can include a link in the comments on it.
Yeah,
in case anyone wants to find it.
Sure. If people
Yeah.
want to reach out to you and ask you questions, are you open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to do that would be to actually make comments in any of the videos that I have, because I read them regularly.
Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want people to know about?
No, I think, pretty much I focus on trying to share as much content as I can when I receive it, through that particular channel. So I've sharing content that I learned around initially from Hilarion. So we worked on that one project, and that when that was over, he kind of moved on. So I've channeled a lot of content from a collective consciousness. And I believe it was the council that I met with. They haven't given me a name. So I just call them a collective consciousness. But essentially, if Hilarion was talking about the mechanics of what the construct is that we live in, this group is talking about how to best operate within your reality, within the construct, to make it the best life possible. So that's a lot of the content that they get into. I've channeled some Pleiadians a few times. And then I think the Council of Light came through once. So it's just a variety or smattering of different groups. But I felt it was important to at least share that with others who were interested.
Meredith, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
I would say the most important thing is, in order to live your best life possible, is to do what brings you joy in each now moment. And that really is the coaching that I received originally from Hilarion. And the other thing is let go of fear. And that is so hard to do. I still am working on that. But he basically said that, look, on the other side of that chasm is going to be a rainbow. And you might not see how you're going to get there, and it might be tough, but essentially on that other side will be a much better experience for you. You just have to let go of that fear in order to jump to that next level. So between those two things, that's probably the most important message that I can share. And it's very simple.
Meredith, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.